I, Dr. Vidhi Jain, student of MBA, Hospital and Healthcare Management Program from Symbiosis Institute of Health Sciences, on behalf of Symbiosis International University, I welcome you to this session of Healthcare International Relations. Healthcare is a vital and emotive issue. Its importance pervades all border access societies having medical, social, political, ethical, business, and financial ramifications. In tandem to the near universal desire to safe and good quality healthcare, there is a growing interest in healthcare international accreditations and relations. For this session, we have with us our very own Professor Shivali Lavale, Director, SSIS, Symbiosis School of International Studies, Symbiosis International University. Professor Lavale, an MPhil in International Cooperation in Education and Training from the Sorbonne University, and MA in International Relations from the prestigious Sciences Po University, Bath. She also has an MA and MPhil in French Studies from Pondicherry University. Professor Lavale worked for over more than a decade at the United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural and Organization headquarters in Paris, France. I would request ma'am to kindly take this session forward. Please, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to see all of you here. I would also like to welcome our distinguished guests, Dr. Afrin, Ambassador Devre, Mrs. Neela Lad, Major General Bera, Mr. Kanendra Bhuyan, who is on his way. We would like to start the session so that we finish on time, and time management is really crucial here. This session is particularly interesting, and when we talk about the interlinkages between healthcare and international relations, people always have a big question mark on their faces. It's like, what is the linkage? So you will see that story unfold through the various presentations this morning. Without further ado, may I invite our chairperson of this track, Ambassador Sudhir Devre, on stage. Sir, please. Ambassador Devre is a former Indian diplomat who joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1964. He has worked in several Indian embassies abroad, such as Moscow, Washington, Geneva, and Myanmar. As the first Indian ambassador in Ukraine, Georgia, and Armenia, he opened the Indian embassies in these new countries. In 1992, after these republics were formed following the disintegration of the Soviet Union, as Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, he was closely associated with the evolution and implementation of India's Look East policy, as well as multilateral economic relations with the world. He was a member of the National Security Advisory Board in 2002-2003. He was also a visiting professor at the Center of East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Ambassador Devre is former Ram Sathe Chair Professor at the Symbiosis School of International Studies. He's also been my personal mentor and guide. Thank you very much, sir, for your continued guidance and support. Sir was also the member of the Eminent Persons and Experts Group of the ASEAN Regional Forum, and he's also on the advisory boards of the Society for Indian Ocean Studies and the India International Center, New Delhi. Sir, over to you.
Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much, Professor Shivali Lavale, for your very kind words. Well, this is a very interesting and in many ways a unique conference, because health normally doesn't get a place of pride in the international discourses. And I think the question would come to everybody's mind, why healthcare in IR, or in a conference discussing healthcare in the globalizing world? Perhaps the trans-border nature of health issues, because health does not recognize the nation-state concept. It goes across the national boundaries Perhaps that may be the reason why health has been brought under the ambit of international relations. But today, we are living in a highly interconnected world, a very rapidly globalizing world, and there are many areas in which health finds itself positioned. And one way or the other, health influences decision making. So much so that today health issues are acquiring a prominent place even in foreign policy formulation. You will be surprised at some of the major international gatherings or summits, so like the East Asia Summit, which is being held every year since 2005 in one of the Asian capitals. Health issues today are given importance. There are 2-3 issues every conference which relate to health. So I would like to give you a very brief overview of the kind of discussions we're going to have with a very distinguished panel that we have put together. And the issues I would like to outline in which health finds itself positioned are global commons. You must be hearing this word nowadays, global commons, which relate to environment, which relates to climate change, water, oceans, and I would say even trade to some extent, and in which and every of the issue of this has an impact on health. If the temperature of the earth is going to go up by 2 degrees, then our health will be affected. Yesterday, Pune had a temperature of 41.6 degrees centigrade. I think one of the records. And that undoubtedly will have effect on everybody's health. Water we know very well, it is so much connected to health. Pollution, environment issues. So all that has direct bearing on health matters. Another is international political economy. It is said that health is wealth, and therefore health gets related to international trade. A number of countries are today engaged in trade matters which have connection with health. Take the case of India itself. We developed our pharma industry over the years, and today pharma products constitute a major export item of India. We seek investments, and major pharmaceutical giants have been investing in India. So trade or investment has direct links with health. We also see the phenomenon of today aging population. Longevity has gone up. It will have repercussions on the economy. We talk of demographic dividend, meaning that if the population is in the age of say 18 to say 35 or 40 young population, they are more productive. That will contribute also to the strengthening of the economy. So if this population which today represents so-called democratic dividend, then you will not have the same economic growth. Humanitarian crisis. Invariably, humanitarian crisis, especially those involving natural disasters, bring in the element of health. People really suffer a great deal, whether it is a tsunami or whether it is floods or whether it is landslides and so on. So everywhere, I think health gets affected. And related to this kind of humanitarian crisis is also the violations of human rights. Because you see today so many situations in the world, military strife, ethnic problems, in which large populations get affected. There are displacement of populations leading to major health issues. And these cannot be ignored when you are discussing foreign relations, relations between countries in the world. The role of international organizations in this context become very important. And the organization which is directly responsible is the World Health Organization. World Health Organization, or WHO, is a specialized agency of the United Nations and was set up when the UN was set up in 1945. The motto of WHO is to um, provide a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not necessarily absence of disease. So it's a much comprehensive, holistic concept that WHO aims at. WHO is in a way is an advisory as well as regulatory body. WHO, in fact, is the custodian of our health security in the world, and they are the ones who bring out the international health regulations, requiring countries, about 160, 70 countries, to report the outbreak of any natural disaster, any disease or illness within a certain stipulated time. Even such disasters like radiation emergencies is also their responsibility. They are also interested with the regulations relating to international travel, food safety, and a variety of issues. And we have here with us a very eminent person from WHO in Delhi. He will be speaking on this subject. And lastly, a couple of issues relating to healthcare and diplomacy. I'll speak at length myself later on. Healthcare has a close bearing on WTO, another international organization, which you know, World Trade Organization, or WIPO is the World Intellectual Property Organization. All issues relating to patents in medicines, or what is known as the TRIPS agreement, called the trade-related intellectual property rights of countries, which again get linked to the manufacturing of patents and so on, have bearing on this. So all these matters are of crucial importance to a country like India, as well as countries which are represented here. And I would like to invite our distinguished panelists now, one by one, to speak on the issues which I very cursorily outlined just now before you. Thank you. Well, the first speaker on our list is Dr. Rodrigo. He's the regional coordinator, and I would like to invite our distinguished panelists now, one by one, to speak on the issues which I necessarily outlined.
Thank you, Ambassador, and good morning, everyone. I think it's quite a nice opening that you have given us to get the theme of the day going, because indeed health has always been on the side, but now it's now a huge issue, and for all countries. And in fact, in many cases, it's not just the Ministry of Health advocating for it, but Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well. So let me walk you through my presentation. Yes, that's the right way. Yeah. So I will walk you through basically it's a walkthrough of global frameworks and regulations that affect health, for which countries have signed up for. It's not as if this is written somewhere, but actually countries like India, all countries sign up on these agreements, and therefore there is a mandate to implement it. And part of our job, as Sir said, is to oversee whether these are implemented well. Next, I will go into one part in terms of coordination mechanisms and response, so that you also get to see, most of you are in healthcare service delivery, how is healthcare delivered in an emergency. Okay, I begin with the first one, called the International Health Regulations. From the 1960s to 2006, 2005, international health regulations only covered a few diseases, practically yellow fever and cholera. But something happened in 2002, which is the SARS outbreak. There it became more important that countries pick up an emerging disease because it has an impact for international spread. So it's not, it was more of a collective responsibility. It's not really a regulation that is imposed, but it's a collective responsibility. That is the idea of the international health regulations. Mainly it's the need for countries to report possible public health events that cross countries and cross borders. It is the responsibility of one country. In fact, the big debate at that time, there was no international health regulation, was for China to declare that SARS was already a new disease for which we don't have a vaccine, and can spread across borders. Also, at that time, research was ongoing. This is quite interesting because for many diseases, research is part of a response. If you've heard of the Zika virus recently, no one knew how this was happening and how it was causing microcephaly. So research, it's like building your warship as you go into combat. So the idea was, let's have stronger international health regulations. And at the core of that is the need to build capacities in areas of public health security. So it doesn't mean we are, collectively countries would like to report on new diseases, but also to strengthen capacities. And what are these? Legislation. There has to be public health legislation that would allow for this. Internally, national legislation across borders and ports of entry. Coordination. Usually, issues like this go beyond the health sector. It goes through foreign affairs. How do you declare? It's not the Minister of Health that will go out on TV to do that. There will be a process for this to happen. If you recall, in 2005 or 6, for the avian flu outbreak in India, it was the National Disaster Management Authority coordinating the event with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Agriculture. It was back then just in poultry, and therefore there was a series of responses both for animal health and human health. So there is an intersectoral coordination. I think the whole point is of the whole conference is also interdisciplinary work. Surveillance, how do you pick up a strange disease? So sometimes there's a lot of rumor. We don't dismiss that. We actually have a process for rumor verification. We review a lot of media stories on a daily basis. Things like 6 children with fever and rash died, and 1,000 more are there. That's something to look into. Now, in terms of reporting, if the surveillance system is strong, you get good details of what the case may be. It may be just measles, it may be something curable, etc. But if it's something mysterious, then action is set into motion. Preparedness, which is a lot of planning, a lot of simulation, a lot of exercises, and of course response. Risk communication, another issue. The public has to understand well what the disease is. You know, it's not because Zika is out there, we will all die. It's somehow that is the misconception when you see everything in CNN. So there is proper communication for certain health risks, as well as for people to protect themselves. That is the whole idea of risk communication. Laboratories, if our laboratories cannot confirm, then another failure. So zoonosis, it's the transfer of diseases from animals to human. If you've heard of Ebola, that was a disease from monkeys. Chemical radionuclear, as also mentioned by Sir. So it's also the regulations mandate countries to invest so that we have these capacities. And there is a regular monitoring and self-reporting mechanism around this. I'll tell you more about that later maybe if there's time for question and answer because there's so much to share. So this is available on the web. There is a new version of the International Health Regulations. The recent addition is that for yellow fever vaccine, it's protection for life. You know, once you get the vaccine, before it was 10 years, now it's been proven that it's protection for life. So if you look at what it contains, it has what it tries to achieve is that because health has no borders and diseases and viruses don't need visas, they will come in. It's whether through you, through some goods, through the plane, etc. So therefore, it is something that we need to look at a larger picture. You will hear now terms like international health, global health security, public health security, etc. And that's the whole idea. When there is a disease and there is enough known about the disease, then travel warnings are issued. Sometimes these travel warnings are unfair, and some countries actually impose a travel warning. So there's also a lot of issues around negotiations on this. At one point, you will hear that, okay, no one wants to go to Brazil. Let's not have the Olympics because of Zika. But that we were proven correct, that if you manage the risks, if you manage the vector, you will be able to have a safe Olympics and safe travel of people. So sometimes it's unfair. Don't go to Africa because of Ebola. There were 3 countries that was in West Africa. And Ebola is endemic in East Africa, and there are so many experts who can pick up the disease and cure you for that. So it's not something that, it's unfair to punish countries just because they also declare. So there are new areas of the international health regulations that I'll talk to you about. Global health security is enhanced. So if we see this as a collective, not as a competition, not as a secret from each other, then it's a healthier world. The other key thing here is that all sectors should benefit. One of the key areas of international health regulations is the ports of entry. How do we monitor health in our borders? India shares a lot of land borders with different countries. And so vice versa, countries need to invest across borders for it. Because of the problems of Ebola and the fact that many countries actually have not reached the capacities they have in those areas that I have mentioned, such as legislation, coordination, surveillance, laboratory, preparedness response, countries have come together through the World Health Assembly yet again to revise and strengthen the international health regulations. So the idea now is let's be better prepared. There is a push for countries to invest in health. If you just look at how much is invested on GDP for health, in many countries it's very small. The standard that WHO is putting is at around 4%. But if you do have countries that, for example, in Liberia before the Ebola outbreak, they were already investing 14%. But still, from that 14, you have competing priorities, maternal and child health, malnutrition, a lot of the basics. Who would invest in communicable disease surveillance? The problem is until bad things happen, that's when people see the importance of it. And I hope that was the last big outbreak that the world needed a wake-up call for. So the other part is from our end. We're not staffed enough or enough people to kind of go to every country. Even this, for me, is a very important advocacy platform to inform people. Because usually in the health world, we are already talking to each other and we are the converted. The important part is to preach to the non-converted yet. So and I thank you for inviting me for this opportunity. So even that is a small thing to deal with looking at surveillance. For example, India is such a huge country. Our country office here has a team, divided it into regions. For Maharashtra, it's the West Regional Team, looking at surveillance. Because it's not enough that you actually eradicated polio. It's enough, what's important is to maintain that it's eradicated. The investment around that is huge. Improved monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. So here's the other thing. When IHR started, International Health Regulations, it was self-reporting. So all countries reported that they had everything until some outbreak happened yet again. So now it's a more robust monitoring framework that we're doing. There is an external evaluation by external experts that come. It's voluntary, but there are also other tools. We use a simulation for an exercise to evaluate capacities and plans. And another one is, should there be an event, we do an after-action review. So we just had an H1N1 outbreak in Maldives, and we're doing an after-action review so that the country then can test how well they really assess their capacities. Okay. Rapid sharing of scientific information. I think that was the last issue that I would like to emphasize, because for viruses, you have to share the genetic material. And many countries are very sensitive about this. If you do not share genetic material, then there's the possibility that you will have late development of a vaccine, especially for a disease that doesn't have a vaccine. If you remember, for Ebola, we were working with several laboratories and pharmaceuticals around the world to develop the vaccine as that outbreak was happening. So the other sad part is that some of these diseases, mainly, especially of poor countries or neglected tropical diseases, pharmaceuticals do not invest vaccine development for this. So that has shifted recently with the new initiative globally of several pharmaceuticals and governments investing around $600 million just to find a vaccine for several diseases. Lassa fever, Nipah virus, Ebola is already done. There were 6. It's a new initiative from the G20 countries. So now more and more you will hear that health is actually a topic in many of these countries. Do I still have time, or I can? Yeah, I have time. So that's another area of international relations, the sharing of genetic virus. I can, maybe in an open forum, I can still discuss further. Okay, so what are the other frameworks you think are not related to health but are that affect us? So one is, I'll just share a few sustainable development goals. I'm sure you've heard about this, and it's goal 3, that is for health. And a specific part of that is actually strengthening capacities of health systems to address health risks, making health systems resilient so that you don't have a health system collapse just because there's an outbreak. I was deployed for Liberia during the Ebola outbreak, and actually health workers ran away. You had health facilities with no health workers because health workers were the first to die. So after the first 2 days of the outbreak, health workers left. Next, okay, we will work, the health workers said, but we would need compensation because it's dangerous. And we would need protective equipment. So that took some time to set up an agreement on hazard pay or dangerous work compensation. So you have things like this that are not inherently health, but part of the health system in terms of the health workforce or health financing that can cause your health system to collapse just because you need to respond to an outbreak. So there are many more issues around this, but that's the whole idea of Goal 3.D of the Sustainable Development Goals. And practically, it's related to several other goals, like climate, as Sir said. Another one is Goal 6, I think, is Healthy Planet. Water sanitation. Goal 11 is Healthy Planet. me move on to the more specific humanitarian part of a global framework, and that's the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. So in the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, health plays a central role. It doesn't talk about just natural disasters or conflicts or chemical emergencies, but also big outbreaks. Again, developed after the Ebola outbreak of 2015. So it's looking at all hazards for all health systems to be able to address an emergency. Next, you will also hear about this for those who are reading about health security, the Global Health Security Agenda. Practically, it is a consortium of several countries, primarily led by the US, to be able to prevent, detect, and respond to certain outbreaks. It's very, very similar to the areas that the international health regulations cover. And it is practically a push to accelerate funding, because sometimes the domestic investment for health security doesn't come. And so the idea of several countries was to, let's push in certain aspects so that we are able to keep at it and, in terms of building capacities for those areas I mentioned. Now maybe we go to the response part. So you can imagine how confusing it is for someone working in terms of international health security. There's several frameworks that you need to pull through, or every country needs to agree to, because there is reporting. There is reporting for the SDG. There is reporting for the Sendai framework. There is regular reporting for IHR. For the Global Health Security Agenda, if you are a country funded through that process, again, there is reporting. So the idea is to actually relate all of these international frameworks. Most of the time, they're actually saying the same thing. So the global push is actually to push for domestic investment for these areas. Now, in response, should something happen, you get a different set of mechanisms, so healthcare is provided to the affected. So in the UN system, we have something called the cluster approach. So there are several sectors here. Health is one of them, and we lead that sector should there be an event. So let's say Nepal earthquake, where you will have practically, we had 147 foreign medical teams and around 300 NGOs. The foreign medical teams surge for 2 weeks and they're gone. But internally, you will have NGOs that are there, around 100 already working in Nepal, but it will surge when there is an emergency. So the issue is, you can't let this go like on their own way. We learned our lessons from the tsunami. That was another lesson for the world, that you need to coordinate, because there will be areas that are addressed, and then you will have gaps. You will have duplications, or worse, healthcare is delivered in very poor standards. And that the affected population deserves just as the same quality of service as a non-affected population. So this system was set up now close to 12 years, and it's working fairly well. Next, this is fairly new, the EMT coordination mechanism, where we have emergency medical teams. Previously, they were called foreign medical teams, but now our idea is to really set up national medical teams that are deployed during an emergency. And there you have some that are military, some that are civilian, or government to government, or some countries actually invest in their own medical teams that are deployed should an event happen. Last is another area where we draw people from, is the Global Alert Response Network. So you sign up for this with your specialty. Maybe you are a surveillance expert, maybe you are a laboratory expert, maybe you are a medical anthropologist or health anthropologist, which we needed a lot for during Ebola. And you get to be deployed if you're available and willing for a certain event. So all of these have vetting processes and standards. Previously, in the humanitarian world, it was almost uh, anyone who was volunteering is welcome, but the practice was not standardized. So I will give a quick case study around Nepal. Um, so the light blue area at the back are your cases of trauma. So in the first 3 days, that goes very fast. The number of cases of trauma. And that's when the national efforts actually should kick in very fast. The foreign medical teams come quite late. But for the issue of Nepal is that we had pre-arrangements for Nepal and India, Nepal, Bangladesh, even the US was one of their co-signatories for a pre-arrangement. But practically, it was the neighboring countries that helped out because they can move in faster, and there were pre-arrangements to do that. And mainly military. We've made the distinctions of government military, government civilian, and NGO. So this is somehow the plot of how things happened, and do look at the yeah, I'll conclude. Don't worry. This is how things happened in terms of response and the case load of trauma. In our planning for preparedness, the most important message is this, is that national preparedness is your best investment because that kicks in first. So for the longest time in Nepal, we've been training hospitals how to manage a mass casualty. So the protocol is across, even if you go to one of the districts I went, and the same tagging procedure for patients is there at the district hospital. The same, of course they were overwhelmed, and that was the only issue, that they needed more people because the shifts were too much. The other big important success there was that their hospitals in Kathmandu, where we invested for retrofitting and planning and non-structural interventions, did not collapse. So if you know your country is a seismic zone, this is one of the best investments you can do. That for an earthquake, hospitals, health facilities, primary healthcare facilities, blood banks, laboratories should not collapse. They should be structurally sound. So sadly, in some of the districts, that's where it collapsed because the investments didn't get there. The scenario for Nepal was a very city-centric scenario, and that's being very practical because of population density. So anyway, so there are 3 options for the emergency medical team. Mainly the host government has the mechanism to coordinate or have its own EMTs. Or the host government we support in terms of coordination. This is what happened in Nepal. This is the Ministry of Health in Nepal during that time, and it's the picture of all our partner emergency medical teams. Or it's totally coordinated by the UN, depending on the situation. So for Japan, New Zealand, they do their own. For Nepal, Ecuador, earthquake with our support, but within ministry. And for South Sudan, it's totally coordinated separately. Okay, when Ebola happened, which medical team was ready for something like this? There was practically no one. For over 6 weeks I was there, we had 3 medical teams that arrived. Practically the African Union, eventually the US, but that was after 3 months, because this is something new. Of course, countries were afraid. They didn't want their medical people to die. And actually, it was more of the NGOs who were out there. Médecins Sans Frontières, IMC. Part of our role was even doing training. African Union teams would arrive and you had to have a simulation training, and we had Ebola survivors as part of the simulation. They were very much keen to show them that, what happens to the patient.